What would you do if you stumbled upon a video online? One of those sleazy, low-quality clips buried deep in the corners of some shady adult site, showing multiple guys taking turns with your wife. I'm not just throwing out a hypothetical situation here. Picture this. You're scrolling, maybe out of boredom or simply passing time, when, bam, there she is. You recognize everything, her body, her movements, even the sound of her moans. It's unmistakably her. Your wife is there, being treated like she's the center of attention, surrounded by strangers, and she's clearly enjoying every moment. What would you even do in that scenario? How do you begin to process such a betrayal? That's how my nightmare began. Not with a slow-building suspicion or some vague hint, but with a shocking video that flipped my world upside down. If you think I reacted like some tough hero, you couldn't be more mistaken. I didn't take action. I just froze, completely dazed. I tried to hit pause, but my fingers fumbled, accidentally hitting replay instead, forcing me to watch it all over again. My hands were trembling so much I could hardly hit the right buttons. My heart was racing, and my mind was in chaos. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trapped in that moment where everything I thought I understood about my life shattered before me. But to explain how it escalated to this point, I need to rewind to the beginning. It's essential to understand what my life was like before it all fell apart. Without that backdrop, none of this will make any sense. I'm Jake, just a regular guy living a fairly simple life. I work in IT, solving other people's problems, untangling their messes, and keeping everything operational. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays decently and gives me enough time to savor the little pleasures in life. I've always been the steady type, avoiding drama and the pursuit of wild thrills. I relished my routine, the predictability of it all. That's what I wanted, something I could rely on. For years, I thought I had that stability with my wife, Rachel. We'd been together for quite a while and had been married for 6 years. She worked at a big marketing firm, one of those sleek, high-pressure environments where everyone seemed to be constantly hustling, battling deadlines, and trying to outshine one another. But Rachel thrived in that chaos. She'd come home buzzing with energy, ranting about difficult clients and frustrating coworkers, her voice full of excitement. Most of the time, I'd just nod and listen, half-heartedly, not realizing the depth of her engagement with her job. I figured it was her thing while I focused on mine. I never imagined that the dynamics in her office would eventually turn my life upside down. We weren't a perfect couple, of course. No marriage is without its bumps. We had our fair share of squabbles, over trivial things like whose turn it was to take out the trash or whether I was spending too much time on my computer. Sometimes our arguments got heated. I'd slam doors. She'd storm off. But regardless of how messy things got, we always had an active sex life to fall back on. It wasn't just routine or obligatory. It was passionate and frequent. We were the type of couple who couldn't keep our hands off each other. I took that as a sign we were still connected and doing fine, even if other aspects of our relationship were less than perfect. Even as things began to shift about a year ago, I brushed it off. Initially, our sexual encounters became a little less frequent. It wasn't alarming, just a transition from almost daily to once a week. Then it stretched to every couple of weeks. When we did manage to be intimate, it felt different, less intense, as if she were simply going through the motions. Afterward, she'd often roll over and grab her phone without a word, scrolling through messages like I wasn't even there. I convinced myself it was all perfectly normal. Life has its distractions. We were both getting older and busier. She was putting in longer hours, and I figured she was just tired. I thought every couple experiences dry spells. It will pass. So I decided to give her space. I didn't want to be the nagging husband who constantly pressured his wife for sex. I figured if I was patient, things would return to how they used to be. But they didn't. I started putting in more effort, planning surprise dates, cooking her favorite meals, picking up flowers on random days to make her smile. She would always act grateful, kiss me on the cheek, and say, "You're so sweet, babe." But none of that ever led to anything more meaningful. She'd still be glued to her phone or buried in work emails, as if there was always something more pressing than us. That damn phone. I should have seen the warning signs. She was always on it, morning, noon, and night. She wouldn't even leave it on the nightstand when we went to bed anymore. I'd hear it buzzing late at night, and she'd grab it as if it were an emergency. "Just work stuff," she'd say, flashing me that quick, dismissive smile that made me feel like an idiot for even asking. I wanted to believe her, I truly did. I wasn't the kind of guy to pry or snoop. I never checked her messages or asked too many questions. I thought trust was the cornerstone of a marriage, so I did my best to give her the benefit of the doubt. I assumed she was just overwhelmed. But I didn't realize back then what I know now, that she was already drifting away from me. She started dressing differently too, tight skirts, blouses that showed a little more skin. I told myself it was all part of her job. After all, marketing is about appearances, right? But it didn't feel right. It was as if she was dressing for someone else, and I was too blind to see it. Then came the late nights at work, which became more frequent. "Just a client dinner," she'd say. Or, "We have a big project deadline coming up." She'd come home late, smelling of a perfume that definitely wasn't hers, with a little too much of a buzz in her voice as if she'd enjoyed a few drinks. I never questioned her. I didn't want to be that jealous husband, the one who interrogates his wife every time she comes through the door. Looking back, I can hardly believe how utterly naive I was. The warning signs were there, clear as day, yet I chose to ignore them. I kept convincing myself we were simply going through a rough patch, that things would eventually improve. After all, every couple has ups and downs, right? That's the mantra I repeated to myself. But this wasn't just a phase. It was something much darker, something I never saw coming. And the worst part? I remained oblivious to it all until it was far too late. I guess it truly began when our intimacy started to dwindle. I mean, when you go from being all over each other to hardly touching at all, it messes with your head. You start asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Is she not attracted to me anymore? When the person you're supposed to be closest to begins to withdraw, you look for ways to fill that gap. For me, that meant sinking deeper into the world of adult films. Not something I'm particularly proud of, but I figured it was harmless. I told myself it's just a way to blow off steam. Everyone does it, right? It started innocently enough, maybe once a week, sometimes twice. But as the weeks wore on and Rachel became more distant, my indulgence grew more frequent. She'd head off to work, leaving me alone in the house. I'd navigate to those shady sites, find a video, and try to scratch that itch. No big deal. I wasn't cheating. I was merely compensating for what I wasn't receiving at home. Then came that fateful day. The day everything fell apart. It was just another Tuesday afternoon. Rachel was at work, and I found myself lounging on the couch, utterly bored. I thought, why not? I grabbed my laptop, set it on the coffee table in front of me, and reached for a box of tissues. Not exactly a proud moment, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do, right? I clicked onto one of those free adult movie sites. Nothing fancy, just the usual assortment of thumbnails, most of which began to blend together after a while. I didn't even bother scrolling. I clicked on the first video that caught my eye. Some amateur stuff. That's typically what I went for. Something that felt real, rather than those overly produced scenes. As the video began, it started as mere background noise. A group of guys in a room, chatting with a woman whose back was to the camera. But then she turned around, and my heart plummeted. I froze. My stomach lurched. It was Rachel, or at least a woman who looked strikingly similar. For a brief moment, I tried to convince myself it was just a bizarre coincidence. I mean, people do have lookalikes, right? I stared at the screen, attempting to assure myself that this woman just happened to share the same face, the same wavy brown hair, the same body. But the longer I watched, the harder it became to deny what I was seeing. The way she moved, her expressions, it was all too familiar. Then a thought struck me, maybe it's a deepfake. You know, those crazy AI programs that swap faces onto videos. I thought, yeah, that must be it. Someone's messing around, and it's just a coincidence that this woman looks so much like my wife. But as the video progressed, it became increasingly difficult to maintain that illusion. It wasn't just her face. It was everything. Her voice, her mannerisms, even the way she bit her lip when she was nervous. There were too many subtle details that only I would recognize. Things you can't fake, no matter how sophisticated the tech. As the guys in the video started getting more hands-on, there she was, laughing like she was having the time of her life. Not a hint of embarrassment. Not a trace of discomfort. Just pure enjoyment. I felt like I was going to be sick. I hit pause, my heart pounding, and clicked on the profile that uploaded it. My hands trembled so much that controlling the mouse was a challenge. I thought, if this is some kind of prank or mistake, the profile will clear it up. But it didn't. There were dozens of videos, all featuring her. Sometimes with one guy, sometimes with several. Some thumbnails were so graphic I couldn't bring myself to click on them. It was her. It was indisputably her. I sat there, completely dumbfounded, not knowing what the hell to do. My whole body felt like it had gone numb. My thoughts raced, but I couldn't latch onto a single coherent idea. I kept scrolling through the profile, hoping against hope that this was all just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. I must have stared at that screen for what felt like hours, paralyzed, unable to move or think, just frozen. Every part of me screamed to shut the laptop and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee it. I had no clue what to do next. My mind was a whirlwind, and every thought I tried to hold on to slipped away like smoke. My hands were still shaking, and my heart felt like it was trying to explode from my chest. I needed to talk to someone immediately. I needed advice, clarity, anything to help make sense of this nightmare. So, without really thinking it through, I grabbed my phone and called the only person I trusted enough to share something so devastating with. My buddy, Ryan. Ryan had been my friend since college. One of those guys you could share anything with without fear of judgment. He's the kind of person who always seems to have an answer, even if it's not always the right one. In that moment, I desperately needed someone like that, someone who could guide me through this chaos. When Ryan picked up, I blurted out, "Are you busy? We need to meet. Like, right now." "What's going on?" he asked, his tone suddenly serious. "I can't explain over the phone. Just, can you meet me at Joe's? In 20 minutes. He must have sensed the urgency in my voice because he didn't press for details. "Sure, I'll be there. Is everything okay?" "No," I muttered, hanging up before he could ask anything else. I threw on a jacket, not even bothering to check my reflection, and sped over to the bar. My mind was racing, bouncing between frantic thoughts. I kept replaying those videos in my head. Rachel's face, her voice, the way she moved with those men as if she had no cares in the world. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so oblivious? When I walked into Joe's, I spotted Ryan already settled in a booth, 2 beers waiting for us. I slid into the seat across from him and grabbed my drink, taking a long gulp before finding the words. "So, what's up?" he asked, leaning in, concern etched on his face. I hesitated. "How do you explain to your best friend that you just discovered your wife is starring in amateur adult films?" I rubbed my face, struggling to articulate the chaos swirling in my mind. Finally, I just blurted it out. "Rachel. She's in these videos, man. I found them today." Ryan blinked, clearly confused. "What do you mean, videos?" I took another swig of beer, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Adult videos. Dozens of them. I found them online, her with other guys." His eyes widened, and for a moment, he just stared at me, probably waiting for the punchline of a sick joke. But I didn't laugh. "Jesus Christ," he said, leaning back, clearly taken aback. "What the hell? I don't know what to do, man." My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "I'm losing my mind here. Should I confront her? Should I kick her out? What the hell am I supposed to do?" Ryan took a thoughtful sip of his beer. He always had this way of taking his time to process things, which drove me nuts, but right now I needed someone steady. "Look, I know you want to storm home and confront her," he said after a moment. "But if you do that, you'll never know the full story. If you act in the heat of the moment, sure, you'll end up breaking everything apart. But you'll always wonder how far this went and what else you might have missed." I nodded, biting my lip. As much as I hated to admit it, he was right. I couldn't just barge in and blow everything up. Not yet. If I did, I'd never uncover the truth I desperately needed. I had to know how deep this betrayal really went. So what should I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You need to keep your cool, Ryan advised. Find out what's really going on quietly. Figure out how extensive this is, how long it's been happening. Once you have the whole picture, then you can decide what to do next. I hated the thought of staying silent, of pretending everything was normal while inside I was falling apart. But Ryan was right. I couldn't just destroy my marriage without understanding the full scope of the situation. I needed answers. I finished my beer in one long gulp and nodded. Okay, I'll do that. I'll get to the bottom of it. The first step was figuring out where she was spending her time. If she wasn't at work, where was she filming those videos? I couldn't just ask her outright, so I needed to start somewhere. The next morning, I decided to swing by her office. At the very least, I figured I could confirm that she was where she claimed to be. As I pulled into the parking lot of her building, my heart raced in my chest. I had been here a couple of times before, picking her up after late meetings, dropping off lunch when I had a day off. Everything looked the same, busy and ordinary. Nothing hinted at the chaos my life had become. Inside, I approached the receptionist, doing my best to appear casual. Hi, I'm just here to drop something off for Rachel. Is she in? The receptionist gave me a polite but puzzled smile. Rachel? Oh, she doesn't work here anymore. I blinked, my heart dropping. What do you mean? She quit about 8 months ago, she explained, tilting her head slightly. She left on her own. I think to take a break or pursue other opportunities. 8 months. I stood there, stunned, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. She hadn't worked there for 8 months. For 8 months, she'd been lying to me. Every time she left for work, every late-night meeting, every client dinner. It had all been a facade. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I mumbled some excuse and exited the building, my legs feeling like jelly. 8 months. I reflected on everything that had happened during that time. Every argument, every cold night spent alone, every moment I convinced myself we were just in a rough patch. All the while she'd been doing what? Filming those videos? Living a double life? I stood in the parking lot, staring blankly at the sky, wondering when my marriage had truly fallen apart. When had everything I thought I knew turned into a web of lies? And how had I been so blind to it all? Couldn't let it rest. After discovering that Rachel hadn't been working at that marketing firm for 8 months, I was certain there was more to this story. That was just the first hint, a crack in what turned out to be a much deeper deception. I needed to dig deeper. If I wanted to uncover how long this had been going on, and what had driven her to it, I had to infiltrate her world. I had to learn everything she had hidden from me. Getting into her phone was out of the question. Rachel guarded that device like it was a state secret, and I certainly wasn't about to snatch it from the nightstand and hope for the best. But then I remembered her backup social media account. It was one of those profiles she used only occasionally, mainly to stay in touch with old friends. She hadn't logged in from her laptop in ages, which meant her login credentials were still saved there. So one night, after she fell asleep, I decided to open her old laptop. It had been sitting idle in the closet for months. I powered it on and headed straight for that social network, praying the password autofill still worked. And just like that, I was in. Her profile seemed harmless at first glance. Just a few photos and the usual fluff, vacation snapshots, motivational quotes, and food pics. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. But I wasn't interested in that. I needed to unearth what lay hidden in her messages. I opened her inbox and began scrolling. Initially, it was mundane. Random exchanges with acquaintances, birthday wishes, and some lighthearted chats with girlfriends. But something felt off. There was almost no mention of her job, like she had erased it from her life entirely. No rants about deadlines, no gripes about her boss, no small talk with colleagues. It was as if she never discussed her work with anyone, which didn't make sense. People always vent about their jobs, especially in private chats. It felt like she had either concealed everything from this account or deleted all evidence of her work life. But why? The more I scrolled, the more bizarre it seemed. It was almost like she was living a double life. Maybe she had a burner phone, or perhaps she deleted every work-related message to cover her tracks. Either way, she had taken extreme measures to keep me, and everyone else, out of that aspect of her life. Then, I stumbled across a thread of old messages buried deep in the archives. They were dated over a year ago, long before everything began to unravel. She had been chatting with an old friend named Sophie, her college roommate, if memory served. That's when I found the first clue that my wife had been contemplating this for much longer than I realized. Initially, the conversation was casual. Rachel complained about her boss, the usual office drudgery. But then the tone shifted. "I swear, Britt, I can't keep doing this job. It's draining the life out of me. You think I'm joking, but I fantasize about quitting every single day, just packing my things and walking away." Sophie replied with sympathy, suggesting she might want to take a break or look for a new company. But Rachel was clearly not interested in conventional career moves. She had something else entirely in mind. "I've been thinking about doing something really different. Something wild." Sophie pressed for clarification, and Rachel hesitated for a moment before finally laying it out. "Have you ever thought about the adult film industry?" I sat there, reading that line repeatedly, hoping I was misunderstanding it. But it was clear as day. She wasn't joking. She wasn't just venting her frustrations. She had seriously considered it, and not just recently. This was over a year ago, long before the intimacy between us faded, before I had any reason to suspect that something was amiss. She'd been contemplating this for a long time, maybe even plotting it. The messages continued, with Rachel explaining that she wanted to quit her job but didn't want to settle for another boring 9 to 5 grind. She yearned for something that would give her freedom and excitement, something where she could be in charge. "I know it sounds crazy, but I just want to feel alive again," she wrote. Sophie didn't seem shocked. Instead, she asked Rachel if she was really sure about this, if she genuinely wanted to go down that path. Rachel's response made my stomach turn. "I think I do. I mean, why not? It's just another kind of work, right?" I slammed the laptop shut, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands were trembling, and my heart felt like it might burst from my chest. I sat there, trying to process what I had just read. Rachel had been planning this for over a year. She was contemplating quitting her job, not to escape stress or burnout, but because she craved something more thrilling. She wanted something entirely different. And for reasons I couldn't grasp, she never shared this with me. Why hadn't she confided in me about any of this? If she was unhappy at work, why didn't she come to me? We were supposed to be partners, right? We were meant to communicate about these things. I would have understood. I would have helped her find a new job or anything else to make her happy. Instead, she kept it all to herself, and here I was, reading about it like an outsider. It wasn't solely the betrayal of her actions that cut me deep. It was the realization that she had already pushed me out of her life long before any of this unfolded. I was left in the dark about when our marriage began to crumble. Was it a year ago? 2? Had she ever genuinely found happiness with me? Or had she always been on the hunt for something more? Something beyond my reach? And now I was left to pick up the shattered pieces, trying to make sense of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was part of. I spent the entire night glued to the screen, feeling each word I read stab deeper into my heart. The messages, the lies, the videos, it was all overwhelming. It wasn't just that Rachel had deceived me. It was that she had orchestrated this entire life without even a hint to me. I felt utterly foolish, and the anger bubbling inside me was on the verge of exploding. I wasn't merely hurt. I was livid. I needed action. I wasn't about to let her waltz away from this unscathed. If she thought she could mock me by leading a double life, then I was determined to ensure the world saw her true colors. Revenge might not fix anything, but at that moment, it consumed my thoughts. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I reopened her social media account, staring at it with my heart pounding in my ears. Then I began to type. I crafted a post that seemed harmless enough, as if I had just stumbled upon this shocking information. "Hey everyone. Not sure if you've caught wind of this, but it appears Rachel has taken quite an unexpected turn in her career. She's been involved in the adult film industry for the past few months. It's fascinating how people reinvent themselves. Don't you think? Sure, it was petty, but I didn't care. I aimed to strike where it would hurt the most, to shatter the perfect little illusion she had built around herself. Once I hit post, there was no turning back. I set my phone down, my heart racing, and waited. It didn't take long. The post spread like wildfire. Comments began flooding in within minutes. Friends, family, co-workers, all reacting with disbelief and shock. What the hell, Rachel? Is this some kind of joke? I can't believe this. What happened to you? The backlash was immediate and ruthless, crashing down like a tidal wave. People were tagging her, demanding to know if it was true, expressing their disgust and disbelief. And the best part? No one had any clue it was me behind the revelation. I had made it seem like it was already out in the open, just waiting to be uncovered. About an hour later, I heard the front door slam open, and Rachel rushed in, her face drained of color. "What the hell did you do?" she spat, brandishing her phone. "Why would you post that? Where did you even get that?" I shrugged, feigning ignorance. "From your social media, obviously. It was all right there if you knew where to look." Her eyes widened in shock. "That's not true. I never—" She caught herself, realizing she had walked into a trap. "Why are you doing this, Jake? Please, we can talk about this." I rose to my feet, adrenaline coursing through me. "Talk about what, Rachel? About how you've been lying to me for over a year? Or how you quit your job to film videos with other men without telling me? What exactly do you want to discuss?" Tears brimmed in her eyes as she stepped closer, reaching for my hand. "I made mistakes, okay? I was lost, and I didn't know how to communicate with you about it. But we can fix this. I love you, Jake. Please, let's work through this." I jerked my hand away, repulsed. "It's too late for that. I'm filing for divorce." She froze, color draining from her face. "Please don't do this. I'll quit. I'll erase everything. Just don't end things like this." I shook my head, my voice icy. "You ended this marriage the moment you chose to lie to me. There's nothing left to salvage." She sobbed softly as she scrolled through her phone, desperately trying to delete my post. But it was far too late. Once something is out there, it's out there forever. The fallout came swiftly. Her family reached out, demanding explanations. Friends she'd known for years cut ties without a second thought. People who once admired her now viewed her as nothing but a disgrace. Her phone buzzed incessantly for days. Texts, calls, voicemails. Everyone wanted to know how she could possibly do something like this. I had lost interest in the details. My mind was made up, and witnessing her frantic attempts to mitigate the damage was the cherry on top. Every time I caught sight of her crying over the phone, trying desperately to salvage her reputation, it filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. She thought she could live a secret life without consequences. Now she was facing the music. It wasn't merely about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power. She had deceived me, humiliated me, and treated me like a fool. Now the tables had turned, and she was the one left picking up the pieces. And the icing on the cake. I didn't have to lift a finger beyond that one post. The world took care of the rest. She believed she could delete it, act like it never happened. But that's the thing about the internet, it has a long memory. Months have slipped by since the divorce. And honestly, things are turning out far better than I ever expected. The initial weeks, though, they were hell. I won't sugarcoat it. There were nights when I found myself lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, feeling utterly defeated. The anger and betrayal clawed at my insides, making it nearly impossible to concentrate on anything else. I kept replaying every little detail in my head, every moment, every conversation, every glaring red flag I ignored, and I couldn't help but wonder how I ended up in this mess. But life has a way of pushing forward, whether you're prepared for it or not. Eventually, I came to realize I had two choices. I could wallow in the debris of my failed marriage, stewing in bitterness, or I could rise up and start constructing something new. So I opted for the latter. I packed my bags and moved out of the place we once called home. It felt like the walls were haunted by too many painful memories, and settled into a new apartment. It's nothing extravagant, but it's mine, and that's all that matters right now. I dove headfirst into my work, putting in extra hours, and even picked up some hobbies I had neglected for too long. I began hitting the gym regularly, embraced hiking on weekends, and discovered a knack for cooking. I'm actually not half bad in the kitchen. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in ages, and we've started hanging out more often. Being around people who knew the old me has been refreshing, helping me feel a sense of normalcy again. Yet, despite my efforts to get my life back on track, I won't lie, trusting women again? That's still a challenge. The mere thought of dating sends a voice in my head spiraling, whispering, what if it happens again? What if you miss all the signs again? Once you've been burned like this, your perspective shifts completely. I know not every woman is like Rachel, but when someone you love betrays you so deeply, it rewires something fundamental within you. Every time I consider putting myself out there, my defenses go up. I guess that kind of healing will take some time, and honestly, I'm okay with that. No need to rush. Now, as for Rachel, if you were hoping for her to hit rock bottom, you might be disappointed. She's made quite the comeback, not just a little. She's thriving. After the initial wave of outrage from friends, family, and former coworkers, she fully leaned into the scandal. It's as if the backlash provided her the perfect opportunity to step into the spotlight. She started building a following on social media, posting regular updates, engaging with fans, and sharing her so-called journey. Believe it or not, she's even developed a brand out of this mess. She has sponsors now, product endorsements, the whole shebang. From what I gather, she's amassed a solid fan base that absolutely adores her. They treat her like some kind of hero, proof that you can rise above public scrutiny and live your truth or whatever. And you know what? Good for her. She found her path, even if it's one I can't follow. Initially, I thought watching her flourish would drive me insane. I figured it would breed resentment, knowing she managed to turn her life around after destroying ours. But oddly enough, it hasn't. If anything, it's somewhat of a relief. At least now, I know she's pursuing what she wanted all along. There are no more lies, no hidden truths. Everything is laid bare. In a strange way, it feels like I've finally found closure. And let's be honest, I've got one hell of a story out of the whole ordeal. How many guys can say they were married to an adult film star? It's not exactly a badge of honor, but it does make for an interesting conversation starter. The next time someone asks me about my ex, I can casually say, well, she found success. Let's just say she took an unconventional route. And if I'm in a particularly cheeky mood, I might even drop, yeah, I used to sleep with a star. That's got to count for something, right? But in all seriousness, I'm in a good place now. Life didn't unfold as I once imagined, but I'm making the most of it. It's funny how things can fall apart yet create space for new beginnings. I still have a lot to work through, but I'm moving ahead, one day at a time. And if you're navigating something similar, just know it gets better, even when it feels like it never will. Thanks for sticking around through this wild journey. I know it's been a tumultuous ride, but if sharing my story helps someone out there feel a little less isolated, then it's all been worth it. Take care of yourselves and best of luck out there. Life's a mess, but it's also an adventure.